Is Starfleet fear of genetic engineering a justified survival instinct, or is it just a massive multi-century overcorrection? I don't know if turning a human-specific trauma into galactic law that ignores every other culture in the quadrant was a good idea. Honestly, it feels a bit too much. In 1967, we saw the Botany Bay drifting in, a relic from 90s that never happened, carrying a man who thought he was God. Ricardo Montalban is playing Khan Noonien soon, and he didn't just play a villain here. He defined the Federation's biggest, messiest, and most enduring trauma. Today we're looking at Spacey and the moment the Augment phobia was born. So stick around because Kirk's solution for Khan might actually be a lot darker than you'll remember.
Original air date logged. Your nostalgia has been detected.
So let's be real for a second. Right now, the news cycle for new Trek is, well, it's bleak. There isn't much to get excited about, but that doesn't mean we just pack it and ignore the legacy that got us here. My plan for the series is to kind of connect the dots. I want to look at the greatest episodes from every era. And yeah, I know I grumble a lot, but there were some genuine gems in the newer stuff too, and we're gonna bring those in. We'll start with Spacey today. Then we'll jump back into time to Pike era to see the legal fallout of genetic modification ban, and we're gonna close it out a century later with Dr. Bashir, I presume. It's kind of a map of how the Federation deals with its own reflection. Now look, I know what you're thinking. Chronologically, the next episode I'm going to be talking about, Ad Astra per Aspera, actually happens before Kirk ever meets Khan. At least it should be, but Strange New Worlds has this nasty habit of being loosey-goosey with canon. So I'll just pretend they didn't mess this one up. Okay? Now, we all know the line. You know the one? It's the scream that launched 1,000 memes and probably popped a few eardrums back in the 80s. But before the movie, and before the Genesis device, and definitely before the chest hair, we had this. This is where it all started. Looking back at the space seed from the vintage point of 2026, it's just... man, it's wild. Back in 1966, the writers thought we would have sleeper ships by the 90s. And look, they were kind of right on being optimistic about the tech, but they were also kind of cynical about the people. Well, instead of DY-100 ships, we got dial-up internet and boy bands. But hey, they nailed the darker side of the human ego. They nailed the fear of eugenics, the collapse of Earth, and the bleak reality of what would happen if humans started to believe they're naturally superior. Because, you know, that never happened before. So, we start the episode with the Enterprise finding this old ship, the Botany Bay. And right from the start, I love that name. It's a direct reference to the historical penal colonies in Australia. It's a bit of history that's tucked into the lore that tells you exactly who these people are before they even wake up. They're criminals and exiles and a dangerous fruit of the world that tried to play God.
SS Botany Bay is a DY-100 class sleeper ship. It was launched from Earth in 1996. The vessel utilized primitive nuclear propulsion and suspended animation chambers to sustain its 72 occupants. It is a significant piece of pre-warp history, representing a desperate escape from the aftermath of the eugenics wars. Records indicate that approximately 40 such supermen escaped Earth at the end of the conflict.
Superman. That word kind of carries a lot of baggage in this episode. We get the backstory on the eugenics wars here, where Khan was an absolute ruler from Asia to Middle East. Think about that. From 92 to 96, this guy owned a quarter of the world. And then he just disappeared? Well, that's until Kirk actually found him. When you see that reveal of the ship's name on the hull, you know the stakes are high. And when Khan finally wakes up, he doesn't just ask for, a glass of water. He starts sizing up the room. And again, Ricardo Montalban is just magnificent here. He's charismatic, he's dangerous, and if I'm being honest, he's like a total creep. But before we get to the creep part, let's talk about the crew's reaction to him. This is where the whole augment phobia starts to show its teeth. Spock is of course fascinated by the history because of course he is, but McCoy? Man, for me, Bones is kind of the MVP of this episode. Before we even meet Khan, McCoy subtly uses the history of eugenics wars to make a dig at Spock. He blames scientists who focused only on logic for the rise of these dictators. And it's a great insight into why McCoy is so wary of Spock's lack of emotion. Despite the popular opinion, it's not just, Spock bad because he's an alien. There is a deep-rooted trauma for all the humans, especially someone like Bones. And he sees where that road leads. That's why he's probably very uncomfortable with the lack of emotion in Spock. So when I talk about McCoy being the MVP of this episode, there is that scene in the infirmary where Khan has a knife to McCoy's throat. Most people would be screaming or begging, and McCoy just looks at him in the eye and tells him which artery to cut if he wants to get it over with. I'm sorry, but it proves to me that the old country doctor has more iron in his blood than the Superman. Now let's talk a little bit about Marla. Look, I definitely wouldn't use the word romance for what happens with Lieutenant McIvers. It looks more like a very sophisticated manipulation to me. Khan is kind of very handsy without asking, and he literally demands that she entertain him. Seriously. And he plays her like a fiddle. It's kind of a tragedy to watch this young woman, a professional historian, basically crumble because Khan knows exactly which buttons to push. He views her just the same way as the rest of the society, as lesser, and he treats her like a mark. It's a very predatory cycle of grooming and psychological dominance played out on a kind of galactic scale. He actually isolates her and he makes her choose between her duty and his magnificence. And he almost gets away with it. Well, actually he does when it comes to Marla. And you can see the tragedy of this woman. Like I said, she's smart, she's capable, but when she's facing a predator who's been engineered to dominate, she actually doesn't stand a chance. Now, let's look at the legal side of things. What was the specific Federation stance on genetic engineering following the events of the eugenic wars?
Following the collapse of the Augment-led regimes, Earth and later the United Federation of Planets implemented a strict ban on selective breeding and genetic engineering. The fear is that ability begets ambition. While the technology to improve humans exists, the ethical and social consequences are deemed too high a risk for a democratic society. The ban is absolute, with no exceptions for non-harmful modifications.
Ability begets ambition. That is kind of the heart of the fear. But here's the problem. This is a human problem. It's a human trauma. We took our failure and turned it into a permanent crime for the whole galaxy, regardless of how other species use the tech. We are talking about species like Illyrians. For them, genetic engineering is tradition, it is evolution, and it's peaceful. But because of Khan and, well, the eugenics wars, Starfleet decided that the idea of being better is a crime for everyone. It is kind of a massive overcorrection that ignores any history that is not our own. In Space Seed, we actually see the reason for the ban. Khan wants to conquer. He tries to take over the Enterprise and kill Kirk, and he almost succeeds. But before we go on, I really have to talk about this big fight at the end. It's literally classic 60s Trek, and it's just pure fun. But I'm telling you in advance, once you catch this, you'll never be able to unsee it. So, in this fight, it's painfully obvious that Kirk and Khan have been replaced by stuntmen. Especially it's obvious for Kirk, who, I don't know, maybe if you saw a blurry photo of the actually William Shatner, might look something like him, but totally not. One guy's hair is doing things Shatner's toupee wouldn't dream of it. It's goofy, it's blatant, and it's magnificent. Here's the thing, every time we zoom out, that's where the stuntmen come in. The close-up shots are where you actually see William Shatner and Ricardo Montalban. But every single one of these zoomed out, yeah, it's fun. But even with the wig swapping and the questionable choreography, here's the thing, the weight of the conflict still stands. It's not just a fistfight. You have here a literal clash of ideologies. And that brings us to the ending, or the tricky Piziki move. I love this part, and honestly, it gets darker every time I watch it. Kirk doesn't bring Khan back to the starbase for a trial, and he doesn't follow the standard Starfleet rules. He pulls a legal workaround that is just... it's chef's kiss. It's peak Kirk. So, what does he do? He drops all the charges and dumps the whole lot of them on SETI Alpha 5. And at first I was like, what? What are you doing, man? But if you ask me, this is kind of brilliant. It wasn't lazy writing, it was a very clever way to handle a Superman that Starfleet was just not ready for. And the irony of it is that Kirk gave Khan everything he wanted. He gave him a world to rule, he gave him people to lead, he gave him a challenge to conquer. And yet, he also gave him a life sentence. It was a punishment disguised as a reward. It's the ultimate version of be careful what you wish for a moment. So, Khan wants power? Fine. Go have power on a planet where nobody can hear you scream. It is, honestly, it's cold, it's tactical, and it's a bit terrifying. Then we have the Spock's final line. He says that it will be interesting to see what happens to the seed Kirk planted in 100 years. Well, we know it didn't take a century. We know exactly what happened in Matara Nebula 15 years later. But the real seed wasn't just the con on planet. The real seed was the fear. So, this episode is the reason why the Federation becomes a closed shop when it comes to DNA. It's why later in our series we're gonna see Julian Bashir living a double life. That's why the mere mention of the name Noonien Singh makes Starfleet admirals break out in cold sweat. One guy in the cargo bay ruined it for the next 300 years. Khan, he's not just a survivor, he's a predator. And the Enterprise crew realized that they aren't looking at a historical curiosity. They were looking at the monster. Space Seed is a mirror. Like, good Star Trek always is. It asks us, what are we going to be? Are we going to be the people who improve ourselves until we lose our humanity? Until we view everyone else as lesser? Or are we going to be like Kirk? Messy, clever, and human enough to outsmart a god? I think the answer is obvious. Even if the stuntmen were a bit of giveaway, I just love it. The performances from both Shatner and Montalban are what grounds this. It's a piece of television that works on every level. The sci-fi part is fun, because it always is. There's action, and the most important thing is that the philosophical meat is very heavy in this episode. Now, what's fascinating about this episode is that all these themes, so we have the fear of eugenics, the corruption of power, the manipulation of the weak, they all work together. They don't clash. They build on top of each other to create this image of a future that it's terrified of its own past.
The incident serves as a primary case study in Starfleet Academy regarding the Prime Directive's precursors and the ethical limits of human development. It is often cited as the definitive justification for the continued ban on genetic enhancements. The seed planted by Captain Kirk continues to influence Federation policy into the 25th century and beyond.
It is kind of the foundation of it. But remember, chronologically, the seeds of this fear were already choking the Federation before Kirk opened that cargo bay. When we head over to Ad Astra per Aspera, the next part of the series, we are actually stepping back in time. But more about that next week, when we're gonna look at Unachin Riley and the Illyrians. So, I'll see you in the next one. We'll see what happened to Federation before Khan even returned. Spoilers, the lawyers are still a nightmare. Anyways, until the next time, M5, full impulse, and engage.
Support the organic creator, like, share and subscribe.